Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Why am I hiding behind this piece of plywood? I'm hiding behind this piece of plywood because I have taken government advice and I am practicing for future terrorist attacks. They want us to run, hide and tell.
I've climbed to the summit of Everest.
I've tackled some big units. I've brought down the All Blacks.
I've trained in Taekwondo for 16 years.
I've been in the Paras, the Royal Marines and the Special Forces.
I've started from the bottom and fought my way to the top.
Do you know what I'd do in a knife or gun terror attack?
I'd run,
Hide.
Tell.
Right now, terrorism is a real threat.
and even though attacks are rare,
There are things you can do to stay safe.
Remember.
Run.
Hide.
Tell.
I feel so much better now after listening to that hand-picked group of fake role models. If you want to know what I mean by a fake role model, please follow this link. Bear Grylls, dear oh dear. I'd like to see him in a real Lord of the Flies type situation. He'd be in my cooking pot before you could say, pass the mustard. On with the show. I've had a huge number of emails about the Las Vegas shooting and have still not had a chance to read through them all. However, I would like to draw people's attention to this video made by Mike Adams entitled Forensic Acoustic Proof of Second Shooter in Las Vegas Massacre. This analysis claims to prove that there were at least 2 shooters firing bullets during the massacre. Although I have not analysed the audio myself, at first sight this looks like good evidence that there was at least 2 people firing bullets into the crowd, not one as reported in the news. The second shooter, it seems, was situated some distance from the first shooter who was firing from the Mandalay Hotel. If you want to watch the full video, you can find it online. So what's the significance of this? Well, the significance of this is huge. Firstly, assuming it is correct, it shows that the Las Vegas massacre was not carried out by a single lone nut or individual. It was carried out by a group. This group would have planned the event in order to make it look like it was carried out by a lone nut, thus escaping prosecution. To ensure that the lone nut was killed at the end of the attack would undoubtedly have been part of the plan of the group. This ensures that the patsy cannot give evidence against the group and ensures there is no legal trial against the dead perpetrator. Again, assuming the analysis is correct, it also shows that the group that planned and orchestrated this event are being protected by the FBI and being protected by the mainstream media in both the US and the UK. The shootings remind me of the Derek Bird Cumbria massacre, which I investigated in detail a few years ago, where I found strong evidence that at least one other gunman was responsible and that Derek Bird was a patsy in a much wider criminal conspiracy. I could mention many more lone gunman incidents where research has thrown up strong evidence that more than the official perpetrator was responsible. It's chilling to note just how easily the groups that perpetrate these attacks get away with their crimes. But hey, next time, just remember to hide behind your piece of plywood and then everything will be okay. Turning to another highly dubious terrorist attack, the Parsons Green bucket bomber. There are so many of these dubious events now, it is impossible for an individual like me to carry out detailed investigations on all of them. One piece of evidence which a viewer drew my attention to in relation to the bucket bomber was the police vehicles that attended the scene after the tube train was evacuated. Analysis of the number plates of the police cars, he alleges, reveals that all the police vehicles that attended had valid MOT certificates. I am informed that generally police vehicles are exempt from MOT testing and have a separate system for maintaining their cars and therefore usually are not registered for MOT. In order to verify the claims, I asked the viewer to obtain a random set of police vehicle registrations and check whether any of them were registered as having a valid MOT. He found that most of them did not have an MOT, but a small number did. So I am appealing for information on this issue. If there's anyone out there who knows exactly what the protocols are for police vehicles, please get in touch. So what's the significance of this? Well, it's being suggested or implied that the police vehicles that turned up at the Parsons Green incident were not real police vehicles. It's been suggested that they may have been props belonging to some outfit connected to the film industry, perhaps. Does this point to yet another fabricated terrorist attack or training exercise? Anyone with more information, please get in touch. And remember, don't forget to keep your piece of plywood handy just in case you need to hide. Okay? A few weeks ago I presented my research into the so-called Bridgend suicides. I say so-called because I do not believe many of them were suicides. This is an alleged suicide cluster of predominantly teenagers in or near the South Wales town of Bridgend. You can watch my lecture from this link. I have recently been told that on some occasions, after an attempted suicide, the victim will sometimes survive the attempt. And on these occasions, I have been told that it has been known for the victim to suffer short-term memory loss immediately before the attempted suicide. Could this be further evidence of stealth weapons testing as suggested in my lecture? Anyone with information on these characteristics, please get in touch. Now, viewers may remember Muad'Dib, or Anthony John Hill, who made a film about the 2005 London bombings, another fabricated terrorist attack called 7/7 Ripple Effect. That film was updated and is now called 7/7 Ripple Effect 2. You can watch it from this link. You may also recall that I reported on the disgraceful behaviour of the UK government to extradite him from Ireland and then incarcerate him for over 150 days in Wandsworth prison for no good reason other than trying to inform people about his film. Now, for many years, Muad'Dib has campaigned to try and shine a light onto the British monarchy because he states that Queen Elizabeth has no right to be on the throne. He can prove that she has broken her coronation oath, an oath which she signed in 1953. This is what part of the oath states: "Will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel? Will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain in the United Kingdom the Protestant Reformed religion established by law? Will you maintain and preserve inviolably the settlement of the Church of England and the doctrine, worship, discipline and government thereof, as by law established in England? And will you preserve unto the bishops and clergy of England and to the churches there committed to their charge all such rights and privileges as by law do or shall appertain to them or any of them?" The Queen then replies, "All this I promise to do." Note that the Queen has a copy of the Bible in her hand containing God's law when she agrees to this.
She goes now to the altar to confirm before God the promises which she has made. Things which I have herebefore promised, I will perform and keep. The Queen kisses the Bible and subscribes the oath.
The things which I have herebefore promised, I will perform and keep, so help me God.
Now, in this agreement, she is agreeing to maintain the laws of God to the utmost of her power. The laws of God means the laws set out in the Bible that she swore the oath to maintain with her hand on and then kissed. The Queen then, once in power, allowed her government to bring in legislation. This legislation has been used to control, enslave and impoverish us all of which Muad'Dib argues goes completely against the laws of God, i.e. the Bible, which means she has broken this coronation oath. This oath is a promise to the people of the UK, to you, to not enslave and impoverish you. Therefore, if she has broken the oath, it means we, the people, have the right to replace her. Muad'Dib states that Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Battenberg-Windsor ought to not be on the throne for a second reason. Let me explain. When the Queen was sworn into office during the coronation ceremony, she was supposed to be sitting on a very special ancient stone, known as the Stone of Destiny, the British throne. This is what it states on Wikipedia about that stone. The Stone of Scone, also known as the Stone of Destiny, and often referred to in England as the Coronation Stone, is an oblong block of red sandstone that was used for centuries in the coronation of the monarchs of Scotland and later the monarchs of England and the Kingdom of Great Britain. Historically, the artefact was kept at the now ruined Scone Abbey in Scone near Perth. It is also known as Jacob's Pillow Stone and the Tanist Stone, and in Scottish Gaelic as Clachna Kinnaimhain. The Stone of Scone was last used in 1953 for the coronation of Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. As viewers may know, on Christmas Day 1950, this stone was removed from Westminster Abbey by 4 Scottish nationalists, and the stone went missing for just over 3 months. The nationalists gave the stone back by leaving it on the altar of Arbroath Abbey on the 11th of April 1951. The stone was then returned to the throne at Westminster Abbey. Well, that's the official story. Please note well, it is the Stone of Destiny that is the British throne, not the wooden chair. The problem is, as Muad'Dib has shown with photographic analysis and other evidence, that those Scottish nationalists made a replica stone and did not return the real stone. The real Stone of Destiny is still hidden somewhere in Scotland. So this means that when the Queen was sworn into power in 1953, she was knowingly sitting on a fake stone or on a fake throne. So what, you might say? Well, Muad'Dib states, albeit some might wrongly state it's only a technicality, that this is another reason why Elizabeth is not the rightful monarch in the eyes of God, whose throne it is. So why am I talking about this? Well, Muad'Dib is on a quest to find the real Stone of Destiny and has been posting Scotland Messenger leaflets through people's doors all around Scotland with the intention of finding information that might help him locate the real Stone of Destiny in his quest to replace Queen Elizabeth and redistribute back to the British people all the wealth and land she and her forebears have stolen from the British people over many generations. You can read or download the Scotland Messenger leaflet from this link. So if you have any information of the whereabouts of the real Stone of Destiny, please get in touch with me or directly with Muad'Dib in confidence. On with the show. Today, a slight deviation from the usual subjects. I'm going to discuss hippies, drugs and murder. This week's guest has just finished his latest book, entitled Now is the Only Thing That's Real, a re-examination of the Manson murders, motives and mythos. What is myth and what is fact in the story of Charles Manson? What are the true motives behind the murders and who was really involved? There are many books covering this topic, yet very few have broken through the trials, prosecutors and the news media at the time. This book includes hundreds of hours of research into court and police documents, witness statements, media reports and interviews with those involved. How do Terry Melcher, Elvis Presley, the Beach Boys, Jane Fonda, the Mamas and the Papas, Michael Caine, Dean Martin, Angela Lansbury, Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, Yul Brynner, Peter Falk, Cary Grant, Steve McQueen, Neil Young, Frank Zappa, Nancy Sinatra, Ronald Reagan and Debbie Harry fit into the tale? What Hollywood secrets did the industry, the police and the prosecution strive to keep hidden? Were the victims really chosen at random by a crazed cult of serial killers, high on a mix of LSD, Satanism and the music of the Beatles? Read on to discover the secrets of the Manson family, their trial, the main players in the case and the murky world of Hollywood. And here's the author, Neil Sanders. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Right then, fascinating choice of subject matter. You've obviously spent a lot of time over the last, few years looking into this. Now, just one first thing to point out, this is some work. It's 560 pages, and it's quite a small typeface as well, Neil.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I don't know how many words is in this.
It's about 220,000.
220,000 words. We actually had to postpone the interview because I hadn't finished reading the book. So there's a lot of detail in here. Now, before we talk about it, there's a few things I want you to point out to help understand the background to the time of Charles Manson, the late 60s. Just tell us what is Haight-Ashbury and, in general, the hippie movement of the 1960s, a little bit about that place and what was going on there.
Sure. Well, Haight-Ashbury is a district in San Francisco where essentially quite a lot of people who would be termed hippies sort of collected and gathered. This became sort of a focal point for this new movement, which was essentially a sort of an anti-authoritarian, based off the back of the anti-war movement, obviously because Vietnam was going off in the time, and sort of after the emergence of the teenager, basically people were sort of rejecting mainstream society, rejecting sort of the paths that have been gone down by their parents, and looking at more sort of expansive sort of ideas about, you know, inclusive society. This was, you know, it's a very, very sort of like troubled time, in as much as there was a lot of new civil rights movements, there was a lot of new student type movements, and a lot of people looking for equality from every aspect of society. And obviously there was a lot of people that were trying to sort of prevent that. The hippie movement sort of sprung out of a collection of sort of musicians, artists, and expressive thinkers that basically, as I say, rejected this and decided to come together in areas like the Haight-Ashbury. And there's a lot of festivals, things like Woodstock and Altamont later. There was the Be In Festival and various things like that. But it was an incredibly tumultuous time, to be quite honest. Like, I mean, for example, whilst people were, I think there was 30,000 people met at the Be In Festival in 1967. But at the same time, 30,000 young Americans were basically getting ready to launch an offensive in Vietnam in Operation Cedar Falls. So there was this incredible sort of dichotomy of love and hate, even though 1967 was actually called, and is still termed as the summer of love because of all these emergent ideas and such like that. It's also called the long hot summer, because there was 159 race riots in America in that year alone. And these were serious race riots. We'd seen the murder of Malcolm X, the murder of Martin Luther King, the demonization of the Black Panther organization, the emergence of the SDS, and then later into the Weather Underground, who were essentially terrorist organizations, the Weather Underground. They decided to have a campaign of unannounced bombings and terror actions against the state, in order to, you know, get their point across. Right. Like,
now, Haight-Ashbury was a place where a lot of very famous people lived, because we've got the Hollywood aspect to this as well. Just tell us a little bit about that.
About Haight, or
about well, who was living there in terms of.
There was a lot of communes. People. I mean, one of the things was there was a group called the Diggers, who was essentially people who felt that you didn't need. They were like almost like freegans, or sort of. You know, sort of travellers, that type of thing. But obviously they just stayed in this area in San Francisco. San Francisco was obviously just a bit south from Hollywood or whatever. So basically, it's a bit separate from Hollywood. So it was an area whereby people who weren't as wealthy as those in Hollywood, in Laurel Canyon or in Beverly Hills or whatever, who were also sort of experimenting with drugs, experimenting with free sex, experimenting with new ideas and new race relations and that type of thing. Haight-Ashbury was an area in San Francisco, and it attracted a lot of musicians, a lot of the sort of like what would become known as the hippie music of that time, utilised Haight-Ashbury as a place to sort of get noticed and stuff. And
it was a bit like a magnet, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Attracting certain types of people who they want to get away from their parents, They want to risk having a completely fantastic new lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's going to be exciting. They're going to meet new people. They're going to have new ideas.
Absolutely.
That's where they all went to.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a sort of Carnaby Street, Camden type thing. It's a place where this is where it's at, this is where it's happening, and yeah, you kids, you can come along here. And certainly at the beginning, it was quite a. It was basically, there was a lot of helping one another. There was organisations like the Diggers that would make sure that everyone had food and that everybody had a place to stay and that people were safe. But it didn't take very long for biker gangs and drug dealers to come in. And like by the end of 1967, it was quite dangerous actually in the Haight, because there was a lot of Hells Angels, Straight Satans, people selling speeds, people selling heroin. A lot of heroin was coming back from Vietnam at that time as well.
Now, in the book, Neil, there's a report from some academic establishment which actually investigated this whole communal living and free love thing. And they state in this report that there were 200, or around about that number, different communities in the sort of Los Angeles area where, well, it actually explains that there are different types of communal living, where you might have one type where there's one male who's bonking all the females, or you might have it's a group of sort of little families in a commune, or indeed other possibilities, right? Some of which involves a lot of taking of drugs. So just tell us about that. I mean, do you think? Because if you go back in history, you'll find civilizations where they live in that way, where they would have a harem, for example. That's an example of that.
Or tribes, or that type of thing. Absolutely. Well, yeah, there was. I mean, again, it was more a sort of rejection of sort of normal or accepted societal values that allowed people. I mean, you know, there's still communes that exist. I mean, Dial House is still going off. You know, Penny Rimbaud of Crest still runs that, and. The idea was that basically, dependent on the type of commune, that we're accepting of you. You can be here and we can all be on an equal setting or whatever, dependent on the thing. Some of it, obviously, you know, I think quite a lot of wily characters just looked at this and went, yeah, I could get some girls off the back of this. And who can blame them? Yeah,
and maybe some drugs as well, perhaps.
Well, yeah.
So, all right then, but do you think that this possibly troubled central government?
Yeah, possibly.
They're thinking, oh my God, this is going to take over the United States.
Yeah,
do you think that's what their thinking was?
I think, yeah, I think definitely, certainly after the Manson case, they utilised the concept of the Manson family to demonise that whole thing. I mean, there were other ones. There's like Hope Farm, which the Manson collective actually got kicked off of, and various other places like that where. So it wasn't uncommon. In fact, what's quite strange is I found about at least 3 or 4 communes, cults, whatever you want to call them, that actually attributed them. They called themselves the Family, which was the name that was erroneously given to Charles Manson, actually, like and his group. But yeah, I mean, there was even that one that Mendax, what's his name, blonde guy, hacker. He was
Assange.
Yeah, allegedly, he was in an Australian one called The Family, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was called The Family. That particular cult.
But there was a few. There's a film called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace by Adam Curtis, who did Power of Nightmares. And there's a section in there where he talks about a communal group. Right. But there were also sort of like, you know, it was only in the 50s that the groups like Scientology started to emerge, and they were not dissimilar in as much as, like, you know, they're a religious order whereby, you know, you go to them, you stay there, you give up your possessions, you become part of a broader collective. There was a lot of that, basically. So it was a time of change. I know that's a very glib thing, but basically a lot of people were looking for support, comfort and direction in that time.
Right. I think now a lot of people are moving. Well, when I say a lot of people, it's fashionable to want to live off-grid. In other words, they don't want any electricity. We don't want to be connected to any utilities. We want to be disconnected from the rat race. But not so much similar to how it was in the 60s, where it's more of a. It's not just a practical thing. It's the whole self, your soul, everything you're given to this group and entering into a group experience, isn't it? It's more of a.
It's a rejection of mainstream ideals and a sort of like, look, that's not what life is about. Life is about experience and interaction and life, not about 9 to 5s or whatever.
Yeah.
And these communes would, in theory, and still in theory, give you the opportunity to separate yourself from society, basically.
And governments will do anything to make them look daft or ridicule them or demonise them.
Yes, yeah, because, you know, they've got a lot invested in this civilization.
Yeah, they have. All right, now let's come on to the book, Neil. I just want to ask you, because your previous 2 books were quite broad in their subject matter, mind control in the media and direct forms of mind control. This is very specific because it's just focusing on the Manson case, albeit it's a lot of detail in there. Why this book, Neil? Why Charles Manson?
I've just always been fascinated with Charles Manson, to be quite honest. He's one of these people that has become he's an icon, and I don't mean that in a good sense. I mean that in the sort of signs and signifier. He's become a representation of evil. He's transcended the crimes that he committed. He's transcended the sort of position that he holds in society to become something far more. What's bizarre is that basically we'll go now W.H. Smith's and find a dozen serial killer books, A to Z of serial killers, and his face will be on the cover. It's widely known that basically Manson didn't actually kill anybody. He's not a serial killer. Some people will say, well, that's splitting hairs, he was behind it. Well, you know, we'll come on to that later. But the other thing is that basically when I started to write this book, I had an idea of what the answer would be, what was going to be behind the murders, what was going to be the sort of the driving factor in Manson, what the cover-up was about, etc., etc., etc. And bizarrely, the more I investigated it, the more I became convinced that that was actually wrong. And the conclusion that I came up with in the end is very different to the one I actually began with.
Right. So it involves a cover-up, you think?
Yeah.
This
definitely.
case. So all right. Now the book is split. The first third of the book, you've pretty much gone through the official story.
Yes.
And the trial.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of quotes from the trial and the different lawyers involved and the different characters involved.
Yeah.
The second 2/3 of the book, really, you're charting Manson's life. Well, right from his childhood through his prison years, and then when he gets out of prison in the mid-60s, and then he starts building this harem up, basically, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Well, so do you want to tell us what is the official story that a lot of people who have heard of Charles Manson will identify with and know that you pretty much knocked down in this book, I have to say. So what's the official story?
Well, firstly, the reason that I've said it out like that is so that basically anybody that doesn't have a clue who Charles Manson is could read this book and they could understand it. People that know the official story and accept that can read this book and they can understand it. People that basically have always thought that doesn't quite sit right with me, again, hopefully there'll be it'll be easy for them to understand. And what I sort of had to do was explain the official story before, so that to ensure that people knew it, before I could then say, now, forget all that. That's nonsense. And so it goes from the murders up until the end of the trial, and then it starts again when he's born and goes up to the trial again, basically. The official story is that Charles Manson was a lifetime criminal, came out of prison in the 67, and basically went to the Haight-Ashbury and started hooking up with a group of girls and some lads as well, and slowly sort of built up this collective of followers, so to speak. They would drive around. Firstly, they were in a Volkswagen bus, and for whatever reason, he somehow seemed to sort of enamour himself with people at Universal Studios and be able to get in with certain celebrities at the time. And the official story is that essentially he wheedled his way into the sort of good graces of Terry Melcher, who was Doris Day's son and a record producer at the time. He produced the Byrds and some of the Beach Boys and such like that. And also Dennis Wilson, who was the drummer from the Beach Boys. He basically moved into Dennis's house and started apparently leeching him dry of all these things, on the understanding that him and perhaps Bobby Beausoleil, who was one of his followers, were to be given a record contract. Basically what happened was he was involved in the shooting of a drug dealer called Bernard Lotzapopper Crow, And when this got back to the people, this sort of kiboshed any chance of a music thing. Now, Terry Melcher will actually tell you that basically they didn't pursue any music with Manson because he wasn't particularly good. That's not true at all, and there's a lot of evidence that proves that. Upon rejection from the music industry, he decided to enact this plan. He felt strongly that...
Just before I'll just expand a bit on that, Neil. But over the years prior to this, he's built up maybe 15, 16, 17 women who were all making love to him, and he's living in they lived in various places, but there was a particular ranch that they got control of. Yeah. And in Chatsworth, they were predominantly females that and the official story states that he was essentially mind controlling all of the people who were his followers.
Yeah. Basically, this is the point, that he led a cult, and through the use of LSD, communal sex, and stripping of identities, giving people new names and that type of thing, which, again, is not true. What he was able to do was basically make these people his acolytes, his complete acolytes that would follow him, and they actually believed him to be Jesus, or the reincarnation of Jesus. He himself apparently felt that he was Jesus and also the devil, and he had sort of elements of both of this, according to the official story. Now, using LSD and mystical religious iconography and a bit of prison patter and stuff like that, he convinced all his followers that there was going to be a race war, an apocalyptic race war that was going to come into fruition at any time soon, which he called apparently Helter Skelter. What the idea of Helter Skelter was that basically the disgruntled black population would rise up against the white oppressors and start murdering people at random. This would basically expand into a race war that would finish the entire planet. Manson and his canny followers would go off and hide in the desert. They were looking for this apparent place called the Bottomless Pit. The Bottomless Pit was a sort of Hopi Indian myth that it's kind of like the entrance to like Shangri-La or whatever. It's sort of like an underground like cavern whereby you could live. And the idea was that Manson would live there for 144, till such time that his followers rose to 144,000, at which point they would re-emerge, go back into society, and sort of take hands on the tiller. They would sort of take over from the black man, who he felt would not have the experience to run society well, and so would really sort of be pleased when Manson came back and sort of take over the world. According to the official story, a lot of this was informed through the music of the Beatles, who he felt was actually giving him messages. Again, this is not true, but this is where he was getting this concept of Helter Skelter. Now,
so this is from the White Album?
This is from the White Album, absolutely. And basically, in order to sort of get some money for them going away to the desert, the official story is that they went over to a gentleman called Gary Hinman's house to try and steal $20,000 from him. This all went very badly, and he was killed. Following this, there was a raid on the ranch, and basically a couple of the people got arrested, and Sandra Good and Mary Bruner got arrested for credit card fraud. So in a rage, he decided to start Helter Skelter, and so the official story goes that basically he sent out various of his acolytes to the home where Terry Melcher used to live, which was 10050 Cielo Drive, which just so happened Terry Melcher didn't live there anymore. It was home to Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate, and they had some friends staying there, which was Wojciech Wachowski, his girlfriend Abigail Folger, who was the heir to the Folger coffee empire, and Jay Sebring, who was a former boyfriend of Sharon, and also he was the hairdresser to the stars. He basically invented or popularised and made it okay for men to take care of their appearance. He introduced shampoo and scissors, and before that, basically men would have their hair cut with clippers.
Is this the birth of the metrosexual?
It may well be. It was actually a film involving Warren Beatty, who's involved in the story later on. Right. He was. It's called Shampoo. You may have seen it. That's the story of Jay Sebring. And if he hadn't have died, Sebring International would be the name that you knew instead of, say, Vidal Sassoon or something like that. But unfortunately, these were all murdered by Tex Watson, apparently at the behest of Charles Manson. The following night, Manson sent Tex out again to the home of, apparently at random, to the home of Rosemary and Lino LaBianca, who Tex murdered, and then they went back to the ranch. At this point, they were trying to move out to a ranch called the Myers and Barker Ranch, which is actually out in the desert, which was even further sort of removed from society.
So at these two murder scenes, with Tex Watson, who was with 3 women as well of Manson followers,
Yeah.
And the story is that they were almost like just under complete mind control, following his orders. They've killed those 5, and then on another night they've killed another 2, which is part of this really potty, ridiculous plan, this helter-skelter thing. Who knows, Manson might have been brainwashed, but he'd brainwashed these other people, and basically he was ultimately responsible for all the murders. We're talking 7 people, 5 at the first one and 2 at the second. Yeah. So that's really what the trials stated. And they actually gave one of the Manson followers exemption from prosecution in order to start. So just tell us about that.
Well, initially what happened was, the prosecution case was that these murders at the Tate and LaBianca homes were completely random, and they were just purely to initiate a response from the black population to cause helter-skelter. Now, immediately you might ask, well,
what we're saying here, just for people who aren't following this is the motive that was sold or put forward at the trial. That Manson was essentially mad, but he was very, very good at controlling people through hypnosis or mind control, and he'd orchestrated this completely crazy plot to start a race war. That's what they were saying at the trial.
Which apparently he would term helter-skelter. Now, you might question, why did they stop? You know, if you killed 2 people to actually initiate helter-skelter, why did they stop? Because helter-skelter didn't start. You could also make the question, why did they start helter-skelter before they found the bottomless pit, which was obviously the place where they were supposedly going to go and hide. Now, what happened was, because at the murder of Gary Hinman, Susan Atkins, who was, again...
so just to interrupt you there for people who aren't following, Neil, this is a murder which occurred before these 2 murders at these particular households, which circumstances from that may have led to these other murders.
They certainly did,
right. This is Gary Hinman, who was on the ranch, is that right?
No, Gary Hinman lived on his own, like away from the ranch. Well, basically what it was that Susan Atkins was actually present at the murder of Gary Hinman. Gary Hinman was a mescaline dealer and a friend of Manson, Bosley, Dennis Wilson, and various other people. For whatever reason, Bobby Bosley felt inclined to go over there and try and get some money off of him. Now, the prosecution said that Manson sent him over there to get $20,000 in order to help helter-skelter. And when Hinman refused, Bobby killed him. That's not the reason for the murder at all. The reason was actually to do with a gentleman called Danny DiCarlo, who was a straight Satan motorcyclist. But basically, there was a raid on the ranch because the Manson group they were stripping down cars, they were stealing cars, they were turning them into dune buggies and then selling on the car parts at a huge profit, sometimes back to the very, very same dealerships that they actually stole them from. When a lot of them were arrested off the back of this, they found evidence that connected Susan Atkins to the murder of Gary Hinman. During the investigation, basically, somebody described Susan Atkins describing stabbing somebody, and they worked out from the details of the Gary Hinman case that this must have been a completely different murder. So what is this that Susan's actually confessing to? So when she's in jail, completely sort of apropos of nothing, really, Susan is approached by 2 very wealthy lawyers, one called Paul Caruso, one called Richard Calabrero, who it's never been explained who paid for these. These were really high-priced lawyers. These were like, a couple $100 an hour. And both of them usually had a reputation for dealing with sort of well-dressed Italian businessmen types, you know, the sort of people that might sit in restaurants or outside coffee shops all day discussing business, mafia types. But they approached Susan Atkins, who's this, you know, teenager who's in on double murder or whatever, and for completely no reason at all, he says, we'll take your case, completely pro bono. We don't require any money off you at all. All that they required of her was two things. One, that she write out a detailed confession of everything that happened, the motivation behind it, who Charles Manson was, helter-skelter, the reason that they killed the people at the Tate house. And their other caveat was that they owned the rights to this. So basically, before the trial had even started, shortly after Susan Atkins had made this fabulous confession about helter-skelter and the cult of Manson and various other celebrities, including Frank Sinatra and Tom Jones, that they'd planned to kill. This was released throughout the Los Angeles press. Basically, the lawyers had arranged for the entire story to be released in the Los Angeles Times in a serialized way, so that the entirety of the country knew the story before the trial had started. It was then passed on to a gentleman called Lawrence Schiller, who actually contained all this in a book called The Killing of Sharon Tate, which was again released before the trial started.
Yeah, so you think that the trial should have been a mistrial for multiple reasons?
There's about 6 reasons why it should have been a complete mistrial, basically. I mean, that, regardless of what you think, that makes the trial completely unfair. There's no way that anybody would not be prejudiced by this story that was in the media and in this book, basically. And it's incredibly strange practice that's never really happened before. I don't think it's really happened since, because, as I say, it would prejudice the case.
Right.
But this is exactly what did happen. What was very, very strange is very shortly before the trial was due to start, after this confession had come out from Susan Atkins, she actually turned around and denounced it. She basically said that she was put in a position whereby she was told, if you don't give us this story, you're going to the death penalty, and we're going to make sure that your child is sent to an orphanage, and a bad orphanage as well. We're going to, like, you know.
Now, it seemed there's one particular lawyer who really seemed to be orchestrating the whole case, the prosecution lawyer, who was essentially selling this story.
Vincent Bogliosi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you think that the mafia is essentially behind him?
I think that there's enough things that he's mentioned in conversation to Charles Manson that indicates that. I mean, apparently Charles Manson was offered, right at the start of the trial, an 18-month sentence if he just turned over and admitted that Tex was behind the killings. And he turned this down because he's you know, his expression is he walks the line. He's not a snitch. He spent his entire time in prison.
Right. Well, let's come on to that then. Let's come on to that, Neil. So we'll just go from his troubled childhood up to him spending a lot of years in prison for very little, really, in his earlier years.
Yeah, he wasn't a lucky guy.
Yeah, and he met various very influential people in
prison. Yeah, throughout his time.
Who were in the mafia, basically. So just tell us about that. Tell us about the few people he met.
The first person of influence that he actually met was a gentleman called Frank Costello. Frank Costello is, he's sort of known by his other title, which is the Prime Minister of Crime. He was an incredibly influential mafia figure that rose to the very pinnacle of certain families. He's one of these people that was actually brought before Congress to sort of explain himself, and there's a very famous interchange where somebody says, "What have you ever done for this country?" And he responds, "I've paid my taxes," which is a nice off-the-cuff thing. But essentially, he had incredible sway in the prison. Whether this is strictly true or not is debated, but there is a story that Manson tells about, or somebody tells that they claim Manson has said, about Frank Costello reading his newspaper in prison and just refusing not to read his newspaper, even though the guards would say, you know, that's not on. He says, look, I read it at home, I'm going to read it here. And this is the influence that he had. Shortly after his introduction to Frank Costello, Manson, who at that point has got a fairly sort of scrappy prison record, you know, instances of sort of fighting, instances of homosexual rape, although for some reason they're not included in his criminal record, and is considered a dangerous but quite intelligent psychopath. He knuckles down and all of a sudden learns about cars, he goes on a sort of engine management course and learns how to be a mechanic. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't tend to point is that he was a car thief before this, and he became an even better car thief just after that. So, off the back of speaking to Frank Costello, he knuckles down, gets involved in this industry, this mechanics course, and then upon release, immediately starts stealing cars and running them down to places like Texas and stuff, where he also just so happens to start pimping out girls.
Right. I was just going to say, the other two industries that he was very proficient in was being a pimp, and also buying and selling drugs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing, like, you can't move cars from California down to Texas. You can't move girls across country without attracting at some point the interest of, you know, some sort of organised crime. In the mid-50s, he was actually, was a pimp in Hollywood at a place called 3 Star Enterprises, which by strange coincidence was next door to where Bernard Crowe, Lots of Papa, would later set up shop. And what he was doing there was it was a acting agency, but essentially an escort agency, and he was getting young girls in off the street, getting them to do pornographic photos and films, and then, if he could, setting them up with clients and then selling all the films. And this sort of collapsed when the father of one of these girls got wind of it and turned up at the office. Now, one of the strange things that's rather overlooked is that his partner in crime at the time was a chap called Tony Cassini. Tony Cassini was under investigation by the FBI because he was a member of the mafia. Following this, Manson, there's a bit more that went on, but essentially he went down to Texas and then went to Mexico to escape certain charges of pimping, essentially. Now, while he was in Mexico, he did a few things. He learnt to bullfight, he learnt to cliff dive, but he's also, in a lot of interviews, basically said that he was moving cocaine around, that he was moving cocaine for the mafia. Now, this would make sense because at that point, prior to this sort of the overthrow of Batista, like it was Cuba to Miami. That was where all the drugs were coming. That's where Lucky Luciano had set up his casino enterprises. And it was only when Batista fell that the mafia felt that it was more profitable and viable to move to Las Vegas with the help of Bugsy Siegel. Now, interestingly, it was actually Frank Sinatra that helped popularise Las Vegas as a holiday destination. You know, his star power was the pull that would allow Bugsy Siegel to sort of build this. And Sinatra was friends with Bugsy Siegel. Sinatra was also basically owned by Sam Giancana. He was friends with Lucky Luciano, and he was actually called to Cuba to sing at one of the mafia's big conferences, and he went there with the Fischetti brothers, who were again very, very sort of high-ranking mafia people. So yeah, but also whilst he's down there as well, Manson is given the hint that he's left a couple of bodies on the beach and carried a Magnum around as well. So the indication is that he was involved in some sort of low-level crime at that point. I don't think he was in the mafia by any stretch of the imagination. Of course not. He was just, you know, if you are a drug dealer, pimp, mover of stolen vehicles and stuff like that, occasionally you're going to rub up against these people, and it's better to be in with them than not with them, basically.
There are many instances throughout the book where he's committing minor crimes regularly, and he's on parole, so he should be recalled back to prison. So just tell us, so you think that's because there's someone in the mafia protecting him?
Well, very possibly. I mean, throughout the 60s, he committed about 6 or 7 major felonies. Like, he was on parole, okay, and he never had a place of residence. He never had a job. And those are the 2 things that you need to get if you're on parole. He never had anything that looked even a bit like that, which is very strange. And these weren't minor crimes. These were rape, statutory rape. There was things like driving without a license, possession of drugs, possession of stolen car parts, possession of weapons. Like, they knew that they had machine guns on the ranch, and for some reason, Manson was able to evade capture again and again and again and again. Now the suggestion is after he was in Mexico, basically these pimping charges caught up with him and he was sent to prison. Now he met several other people whilst he was in prison. One of them was a chap called Creepy Carpus. Now Creepy Carpus was a member of the Mar Barker gang, which was, you know, a gang that went around robbing institutions, and I think he was the person that had the longest time at Alcatraz, Creepy Carpus, and he basically kind of took Manson under his wing. He taught him a few things on guitar and stuff like that. He'd previously learned guitar at, I think it was Give Up Boys Home. He was taught it. We also learned to box. Manson was actually a very, very good boxer. And Creepy Carpus, just before Manson was going to get out, what he did was he wrote to some people for him. He wrote to Frankie Carbo, and who was an incredibly influential mafia figure, and he also wrote to Mickey Cohen. Now Mickey Cohen was basically in charge of like entertainment on the West Coast. So basically, like, if you want to get in clubs in San Francisco, you need to speak to Mickey Cohen. Now, did this have any influence on Manson? Well, we kind of know that it did, because Mickey Cohen wrote back to Creepy Carpus saying, yeah, fine, send this lad over to these clubs or whatever. When Manson first turned up in San Francisco, there's a guy who was the sort of conduit for him getting into playing clubs. And to be fair, this guy actually said that no, he's not suitable for this type of club, it's suitable for this type of club. But this guy was well known in the industry as being like a sort of a conduit for mafia. The mafia basically went from owning the jukeboxes to owning the radio stations and payola, to owning the record companies, to owning the artists. And you know, they can spread their influence either through providing drugs, providing protection, or whatever. I mean, one of the biggest cases, as I say, is Johnny Rosselli, who got Frank Sinatra out of his contract with Tommy Dorsey by making him an offer he couldn't refuse. Right, yeah. And that long list that is on the back of your book, Neil, of famous people, you think that a lot of them are connected to the mafia? Well, some of them are, and some of them aren't. Like, I mean, the connection to the mafia is really tangential in as much as basically it was the mafia that was providing the drugs. It was the mafia that had the ability to oversee other criminal enterprises, the production of pornography, the use of girls for pimping and that type of thing. Just prior to his release in the late 60s, Manson was visited by a gentleman called George Shibley. Now, George Shibley was another one of these lawyers that people just... He was a $250 an hour Beverly Hills lawyer in the late 60s, so that's mega, mega money. And he spent a serious amount of time chatting with Charles Manson before his release, and this was never fully explained. So this is before he's built up his harem and mind-controlled all these women, mind-controlled all these women and started building up an empire for himself. Before that, he's got out of prison with nothing. Yeah, he's got... Apart from some contacts. Apart from some contacts, a bit of a, you know... a bit of savvy, bit of criminal savvy, and a charmer and all the rest of it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories about when he's in prison about his hypnotic powers, like, and basically, this is where you start to realise that a lot of the things that you know about Charles Manson are disinformation. There was a book called Charles Manson in His Own Words, which was written by Newell Emmons, and people think this is a very good book. It's not. It's been widely rejected by Manson as being completely false. Apparently, Newell Emmons wrote the truth, took it to the publishing company, and they said, no chance, mate, change that. And go along with the story, which is the book Helter Skelter, which was Vincent Bogliosi. Right. Basically the stories of him in prison are things like him being able to hypnotise people with the use of headphones. He would hang headphones off people's beds whilst they were sleeping, and he'd have pre-recorded a message, and this would go into their heads whilst they were sleeping. And he used this to win a talent contest, for example, with his band The Okies and stuff like that. It's not true, and I can tell you why it's not true, because that doesn't work. When you're asleep, your state is not receptive to hypnotic command. So that's nonsense. That's just a story that is sort of put about to give the idea that he became this incredibly manipulative person. He was actually interested in Scientology. Once he was in prison, he had over 150 hours of auditing, which is the interviewing process by which you release your thetans during with a chap called Lania Rainier. And Lania Rainier basically claimed, so this turned out to be a lie, but he claimed to have known personally L. Ron Hubbard and to have been trained by himself. But so it wasn't an official affiliation to Scientology, but there was certainly enough being passed off. Manson credits Scientology with curing his depression. Like, he spent a long time in the hole when he was quite young, you know, isolation. And he credits Scientology with being able to withstand that, and this concept of coming to now, being in the now. Like, there's stories where people say, you're never going to get out of prison, Charles, you're never going to get out of prison. And you'll turn around to them and say, what prison? I'm not in prison. I'm me. I'm me wherever I am. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. And this is actually a concept that's taken from Scientology. A lot of the things that that you would attribute to Manson, like answering a question with the same question. Like there's an interchange where apparently he spoke to Linda Kasabian, and she says, "I like the ranch," and he goes, "I like the ranch. I'd love to live on the ranch. I'd love to live on the ranch. Can I live on the ranch? Can I live on the ranch?" And he just tracks it back. That's a Scientology TR training exercise. There's also talk of him making faces and moving his hands around, and you have to follow him. That's a TR. That's a training exercise of Scientology. Being able to sit there and absorb insults without any reaction at all, which we know Manson was famous for, that's called bull baiting. It's a Scientology training exercise. And so whilst he's in prison, he's absorbing all these different things. What a lot of people say is that he read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and this was something that allowed him to become a cult leader, so to speak. Personally, I think that this is where you start to see people mashing together disparate bits to try and build a picture of Charles Manson that is not strictly accurate.
So let's just come on to what you think might have really been going on there with these two murders, or two murder scenes with 7 murders.
Yeah.
You've got Zebring, who was, you said he was a hairdresser, but he was also a very prominent drug dealer.
Yeah.
And he was dealing drugs to all of these famous people.
Yeah, Sebring was
cutting their hair and then giving them a bit of cocaine or whatever they wanted.
Absolutely,
right?
and this has been confirmed by Steve McQueen's wife.
Right. And the other household that the murders had, there was possibly drug connections there, and other, well, let's say fraud connections as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But the actual group, the family as they were called, Manson's group, had many links to both these properties and people at the properties. Yeah, so it wasn't random. The motives was connected to drugs and trying to protect people who have been using and supplying drugs that they don't want to hang out to dry. So Manson's a scapegoat, and this whole mind control thing is invented in order to protect a whole load of famous people. That's what, is that?
Essentially the cult leader aspect of it, the helter-skelter aspect of it, the random nature of it, and his rejection by the music industry, that's all nonsense. Like that is...
So he was potentially going to get a decent recording contract, you think?
He had a record contract with Brother Records, which was the record contract that was owned by the Beach Boys. He recorded an album. He recorded over 300 hours of material at Brian Wilson's bedroom studio. Brian Wilson is the genius leader of the Beach Boys who wrote Pet Sounds. The only other person that ever recorded at Brian Wilson's studio was the Beach Boys. That is incredibly... So
you think he was much more closely linked to the Beach Boys than people say?
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why they've chosen Helter Skelter and the White Album to demonize him is to take away that, to take the attention off the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
So you think they were trying to protect the Beach Boys in the trial?
Absolutely. Nick Grillo, who was the Beach Boys manager, who was connected to the Mafia, I think it was him that introduced the concept of the Beatles, because the Beatles were essentially their commercial rivals, and also they weren't in America at the time.
Yeah,
so
they're in another country. Yeah. So fair game, I suppose, isn't it?
What happened with regards to Dennis Wilson? Now, the story is that Dennis Wilson was...
So he was the heartthrob of the band as well.
Yeah, he's a really good-looking guy. He's the only person that could actually surf. The rest of the Beach Boys, genius as they actually were...
Only one of them could surf.
Genius as they were, they were a little bit sort of buttoned down, if you know what I mean. They weren't as sexy as Dennis. Dennis was a good-looking guy, and, like, you know, proper beach body and all that. And the story is that Susan Atkins and Ella Jo Bailey were hitchhiking, and they managed to flag down Dennis Wilson and basically went to his house, and then later they went back to Manson and says, look, we've got this fabulous house, and Manson just turns up en masse and basically decides to stay there. This is not strictly true. Okay, Manson had already been sort of mysteriously enamoured with people like Gary Stromberg. Gary Stromberg had set him up to do demos at Universal Studios and places like that. He'd already been sort of like involved in script writing for various films. There's a story that basically is utilised to highlight the concept that Charles Manson is racist, which we'll come on to in a bit, where apparently he was doing a story of Jesus, and when they said that they wanted a black actor to play Jesus, he rejected it and just stormed out. It's not true. This film never really happened. Like, why the relationship between them broke down is not entirely clear, but Gary Stromberg was paying for rehearsals for him after that for an awful long time. Mm-hmm. So the story is that Dennis Wilson basically met him when he just turned up at his house. That's not true. Where Dennis Wilson first met Charles Manson was at Gary Hinman's house when they were buying mescaline. Now, that's a rumour. It's not been 100% confirmed. What has been confirmed is that the time where it was arranged for him to go and stay with Dennis Wilson was at Elvis Presley's house. Now, they were playing cards. When Elvis wasn't there, he had a house in Hollywood, and basically when he wasn't there, and sometimes when he was there, they'd turn up and they'd gamble, which was obviously illegal at the time. And the suggestion is that this was probably overseen by a certain element of organised crime. Mm. Dennis had split up with his wife, and so basically he wanted some company. And so Manson's there with a group of girls and access to drugs, a lot of drugs. And Dennis likes that. So basically he says, you know, you won this hand at cards, rather than me pay you the money I owe you, why don't you come live with me? Mm. And so he did, and this was in 1968, this was in the summer of 1968. Mm-hmm. Dennis's friends at the time were Greg Jacobson and Terry Melcher, and upon meeting Charles Manson in 1968, they basically decided that it would be a really good idea to do an album. And this is Manson, you can't do it on your own. You need to have a group behind you. Why don't you get Bobby Bosley to play guitar, the lads to play the instruments, and the girls, they can be singers. They can be backing singers, like a sort of like Pan's People or something as well. Like, do you know what I mean? Like a sort of eye candy. And they were going to call this this group the Family Jams. Mm-hmm. Charles Manson and the Family Jams. So the Family is actually the musical group that they were looking at. Now, this happened in 1968. This is confirmed by Greg Jacobson, Van Dyke Parks, even Terry Melcher. And in fact, it was actually Dina Martin, who was Dean Martin's daughter. She accidentally wrote in her autobiography about a party that started at Dennis Wilson's house, went to Mama Cass's house via Elvis's house, and then finally ended up at Cielo Drive at Terry Melcher's house, at which Charles Manson was there. He was there at Cielo Drive a year before Terry Melcher claims to have met him. Terry Melcher says that he only met him briefly in 1969, and that he immediately decided this guy was talentless and just couldn't be bothered with it. It's not true. Him and Greg Jacobson were arranging to have a documentary to coincide with the release of the album, which was we called The Family Jams, which was going to be released on Brother Records, which was the record company owned by
So you think
the Beach Boys.
That name, The Family, at the trial was perverted to become the name of a cult, which didn't actually exist?
Yeah, one of
you just think it was Manson with a harem, essentially.
Manson with a group of girls, with a stable of girls. Mm. He's a pimp. You could, like, he's even got a bottom bitch, which is basically the girl that controls the other girls, which is Squeaky. You can see how
bottom bitch.
Yeah, it's just a phrase that it basically means it's your girl that's in charge, that basically she's your number one girl, but she's going to keep all the other girls in line.
I'll shut that down. Bottom, right, yeah.
So, and this is what Squeaky does. She actually, you know, does this. Squeaky's the little redhead girl, Lynette Fromm, who would later try and assassinate Gerald Ford.
Right.
But yeah, what's strange?
So let me just ask you then, Neil. This video that I've seen at the trial, right, where they've got three of the girls, they all dress the same and they cut the haircut the same, and they're coming out and they're all smiling at this really serious murder trial.
Yeah.
They've got these smiles on their faces, seemingly orchestrated.
Yeah.
And people say, well, look, they're under mind control.
They're certainly on acid, because somebody was feeding acid to them all the way through the trial. There's a lot where you can actually watch Manson desperately struggling not to like fall off his chair, he's so high.
Right.
Like somebody was mucking about with the trial.
So you don't think that was those girls were doing that under the command of Manson's mind control?
I don't think they were doing it under the command of Manson. No, certainly not. No.
Right. Right.
I mean, one of the things as well is that basically a lot of these things, like the concept of the family, like the concept that the trial was slightly unfair, are discussed by Manson. This is one of the main sort of points that I've got in the book, is that I've gone, nobody ever bothers to listen to what Manson says in his interviews.
Yeah, I can understand that though. Yeah. It's you really, because you've got a lot of quotes from Manson in the book,
yeah,
right? And when you read them, there's clearly meaning in there, but you really have to sit and study them,
yeah,
to understand what he's talking about. A lot of them are cryptic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they've clearly got meaning, and he's using metaphors as well a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of revelations and stuff like that that are sort of hidden behind nicknames and things like that. Like he'll call Bobby Beausoleil the Frenchman, and
he has a word for the mafia as well, doesn't he?
New York,
right?
Or the Catholic Church, or the Catholic Cross. Any time that he's making a reference to that, he's talking about New York.
Right.
Sorry, he's talking about the mafia.
Because obviously people who don't, the mafia exists on each coast, and there's
different families, different factions trying to sort of get in and stuff like that. Nick Grillo, who was the mafia-connected manager of the Beach Boys, after he kicked Manson out, because Manson had written at least 2 songs for the 2020 album, which was released by the Beach Boys. This was credited
and that's
to
part
Dennis
of the contention, is that Manson wanted to get. He was promised to be paid, and he wasn't paid for his music. It was on the Beach Boys album.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is admitted. Like Dennis Wilson did interviews in Rave magazine in England, where he's talking about how Manson's going to be his next big thing, and how he's already helped him write some songs, and he's going to release him, possibly under the name The Wizard, possibly under the name The Family Jams, and basically. Yeah, that's certainly the case. But when Grillo refused to pay Manson, Manson turned up at his office and says, "I'm not one of these rock stars. I'll blow up your house and blow up your car." And Nick Grillo said, "Try it. I'll phone New York." And Manson said, "I'll phone New York." So that sounds nonsensical.
I remember that part in the book. He actually says, the guy says, "Okay, I haven't given you the money, the royalties for the songs that you wrote."
Yeah.
And he says to Manson, "Well, sue me."
Yeah.
And Manson says, "I'm not going to sue you, I'm going to blow up your house."
Yeah. And he says, "Fine, I'll phone New York." And so Manson responds, he says, "No, I'll phone New York, because I ice pick New York."
Right.
Which means...
So they're both saying, well, I've got connection to the mafia.
Yeah.
No, I've got connection to the mafia.
Yeah. So it's a big mafia off, basically.
Yeah, a mafia off. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, this is the point. A lot of these things are revealed in talks with Manson. So I don't want to get ahead of where we are at, but he's admitted in an interview to Hard Copy that the reason he turned up at Lino LaBianca's house is because basically he was sent there by Frankie Carbo, the mafia guy, to get a little black book. And the guy responds, he says, "What did Lino LaBianca, did you know Lino LaBianca?" He says, "No, I didn't know Lino LaBianca, but Lino LaBianca knew Frankie Carbo, and I know Frankie Carbo." And that was it. And we'll come back to that in a bit, obviously. But
right. Well, I mean, it's clearly there's a lot of detail in the book that we haven't got time to go into. One thing that I do want to ask you about is the more sort of salacious aspect of what was found at the Tate property.
Yeah.
Because Roman Polanski, this famous film director who was married to Sharon Tate, she's 8 months pregnant when she gets murdered. He's in England making a film.
Yeah, Day of the Dolphin.
Conveniently. I don't know whether you suspect any involvement of Polanski in the murders.
No, there is a theory that basically, that she was sacrificed for him, and it was something to do with Alex Sanders initiating her into witchcraft on the set of The Eye of the Devil. That transpires is a lie. He never did that. He admitted that he lied many years later.
So after the murders, obviously the police search the house, and there's films up in the loft.
Well,
so just tell us about that.
Well, the police weren't the first people to get there, were they? Like the first people to get there were Rudy Altabelli, who's the owner of Cielo Drive, who claims to be in the mafia and is a drug dealer.
Right.
Jack Nicholson, the actor,
Yeah.
and Robert Evans, the producer. Robert Evans.
Were the police not there on in the morning?
This has never been sort of like, the timeline's very, very strange about this. They turned up and cleaned the place, right? Robert Evans, for people that don't know, okay, is a film producer who's
because people might not be following this. This is a murder scene of 5 people who've been gruesomely murdered, right, with knives, and some shot and strung up by the neck in the living room. Very, very gruesome scene. Yeah. Which you think was a drug deal stroke robbery gone wrong, perhaps, right? All the details are in the book. We haven't got time to go in the murder scene and all of that,
we'll get
because it's all in the book, the murder scene and the evidence of the phone line being cut and the position of the various victims and all of that, right? It's all in all that detail. But this is an extremely gruesome murder scene. Yeah. You're saying that there's possibly Jack Nicholson,
the actor, Robert Evans, the world famous producer, and Rudy Altobelli, who's the owner of the property,
right, are possibly turned up at the property before the police, and they're trying to
they
sanitize the murder scene.
Well, this is what they said. This is admitted that they turned up and they cleaned the place so that Roman Polanski wouldn't be horrified when he arrived. What's really strange is that when Roman Polanski actually came back, Robert Evans, who was his friend, he put him up in a suite at the Hollywood studio that he was working, that had just recently been vacated by Julie Andrews. He charged him for it, though. Top whack. Rudy Altobelli, who'd been there to clean up and get rid of the bloodstains so that Roman Polanski wouldn't have to see this horrific scene. Except he didn't get rid of the bloodstains. Pig was still written on the door. The blood was on the carpet. Rudy Altobelli kept the bloodstains as they were for the entire time that he stayed at the property. In fact, it wasn't until the 90s that the door was finally sold on to Trent Reznor, and he used to show his guests, look, this is Sharon Tate's blood. He sued Roman Polanski for ruining his decor and refused to give him back his deposit.
Right. Well, I've seen an interview. I watched an interview with Roman Polanski of this, Clive James, I think it was, and it's, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth like in that interview, and but he's rumoured to have been into drugs and making strange films.
Ferdinand Main,
basically.
Kind
you see on the movies.
Yeah.
So tell us what was found in the loft.
Oh, right, sorry, yeah. Porn, essentially.
Homemade porn.
Homemade celebrity porn. Now, again, this is one of the things that Manson talks about Dennis Wilson owning a VCR-type player on which they would watch traded celebrity porn. He makes reference to Jane Fonda trying to get him in bed.
Now, hang on a minute. So there will be, I know I'll get emails from that, VCR, 1960.
Whatever, a tape-playing machine.
Which were available, if you had a lot of money in 1969, there was technology that you could buy, it cost a fortune, to be able to record and play in your own house. So it probably wasn't an actual VCR.
No, that type of thing. But that's the point. It was so incredibly out there for someone to have something like that.
But someone like Polanski would have all that.
Well, he apparently did, as did Dennis Wilson. The Manson group were proven to be filming pornography in various places, but essentially what was found at Cielo Drive and denied initially, and then basically they told a sort of half story, which was there was one film that was Roman Polanski making love to his wife Sharon. What was actually revealed by a detective called Hal Lipsett throughout later on was that the LAPD got there and seized these tapes and then were trying to sell them on. And these were pornography tapes. There were tapes like, there was an orgy with Mama Cass, Warren Beatty and Yul Brynner. There was a homosexual tryst between Peter Sellers and Yul Brynner.
So Peter Sellers is having sex with Yul Brynner?
Apparently in this film. This has been confirmed again by a number of people, including, in the interview with Ronald Reagan Jr., Charles Manson basically says, did he tell you about that? Did he tell you about Yul Brynner and Peter Sellers in the closet with each other?
So let me just play devil's advocate. Yeah. Why would all of these celebrities with these? Because Peter Falk is involved as well in one of them, is he?
No, Peter Falk was basically. The suggestion is that he hooked up with Manson whilst he was working on this film about Jesus with Gary Stromberg.
Right.
When Manson was in Vacaville, which was after the murders and stuff like that, he was put on some really heavy tranquilizers and started writing letters to loads of people, revealing all these celebrities that he used to know. And he claims, he wrote to a bloke called Bill Dakota, who was in this gossip magazine in Hollywood. And in this letter, he claims that whilst he was at Universal Studios, he had sexual liaisons with Peter Falk, and the Robert Conran, who was the lead actor in Wild Wild West. Columbo and Wild Wild West.
So Manson claims to have had sex with Columbo.
Yeah.
Right.
Interestingly, Columbo turned up every single day of the trial.
Yeah, this is what it's mentioned in the book, that Columbo's there watching this trial.
Yeah.
Right. And a whole load of other
celebs turned up, yeah.
Steve McQueen?
Steve McQueen was, well, I think Steve McQueen avoided it because, but he certainly was interested in it.
Yeah.
Because at one point,
there's a
Keith
lot of
Moon told him that some of the Manson lot were hiding under his house. Keith Moon was his next door neighbour.
Right. So a lot of sort of celebrities who might have been involved in making such films or taking drugs.
Yeah.
They're being protected?
Very possibly. I mean, what happened was basically the LAPD tried to sell these tapes. They kept them for a while, declined that they existed, and then a few years later they were trying to sell them. And a private investigator called Hal Lipsett apparently got hold of some copies of this and made this public, at which point it all sort of disappeared. Because
so why would a celebrity do that then? Because they're just compromising themselves.
Have you seen Paris Hilton?
Paris Hilton. What, the film?
Well, yeah, you know, people make sex tapes.
Like, yeah. Well, yes, of course. But what, are they're just under the influence? Do you think it was maybe they didn't think because camcorders were not readily available at the time?
It's
so
it
was a new thing.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's a bit of excitement. You know, they're all you know. There's this ongoing party that's at Terry Melcher's house, and
they're all on God knows what drugs.
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah. And the mamas and the
and brings the camera out.
Yeah, absolutely, and they have an orgy. I mean, this was a time when orgies and free sex was a concept that was out there. This is partly sort of the concept of the commune and stuff like that. That it gives you the opportunity to be involved in that type of sex. I mean, that's essentially what attracted Dennis Wilson to the Manson group. An interesting point about the Manson orgies was that they were bisexual.
Yeah, because Manson wasn't bothered, was he? He would have it off for men as well, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a strong suggestion that was another reason why they had to sort of like distance the Beach Boys from the case and to introduce the concept of the Beatles. Was because basically Manson and Dennis were lovers.
Do you think that then?
Was it refuted by
Wilson?
No, he died before he basically drowned, before he could, nobody really ever asked him. There's a whole series of quotes from other people that are probably a bit too graphic for me to say on this programme, but they're in the book, indicating sexual acts involving Manson and Dennis Wilson. People like Sandy Good, who was a follower of Manson, has said in various interviews that basically Dennis loved Manson. They were really, really in love. Manson was asked basically when he was on trial, if you could see Dennis right now, what would you say to him? He says, I wouldn't say anything. I'd just make love to him.
Right. All right. Now, just one other thing. We're not saying that Manson's we're not letting him off the hook for being a very dangerous
he's an incredibly dangerous person, yeah.
Because you believe he did murder at least one person.
I think he was,
and slashed the face of Hinman.
He slashed the face of Gary Hinman. I believe he was present for the murder of Abigail Folger and Wojciech Wachowski. Right. I believe that he was involved in some sort of murder when he was younger in Mexico. And he certainly shot Bernard Lotzapapa Crow and believed that he'd killed him. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing. I think the best thing would be if I now just explain sort of how it sort of spiraled from the Gary Hinman case and explained exactly what happened. The Manson group had got in with a group called the Straight Satan's Motorcycle Gang. The Straight Satan's Motorcycle are kind of like the Hells Angels. They're 1% outlaw biker gang. They move drugs. They basically were involved in pornography to an extent through people like Bill Vance and then also the shifting of drugs. They move speed and various things like that. Bikers do and stuff like that. And they became sort of interconnected. Danny DiCarlo, who was the treasurer of the Straight Satan's Venice ranch, was actually staying with them. He was the person that brought all the guns to the ranch and stuff like that. Now, why were they stripping down cars? Why were they stripping down dune buggies or making dune buggies? Well, if you look at the path of the Manson family, they'd go down to Mexico, down Texas, onto the coast, up and down the west coast, up and down the west coast, up and down the west coast, down to Alabama, back, up and down the west coast, up and down the west coast, down to sort of near the Mexican border. They're going there, they're picking up drugs from Mexico, they're coming back, and then they're selling them up and down the coast, whilst he's also pimping these girls out. So why would they be having dune buggies? Well, because dune buggies are perfect for that sort of terrain, for getting across the desert, avoiding the police, avoiding other less, you know, versatile vehicles, and basically allowing you to get to Mexico and back. And it's also, again, admitted by people like Patricia Krenwinkel and stuff like that, that Manson was pimping out the girls, that he had different stratas of girls. He had his front porch girls, he had his back porch girls, which is, you know...
And he would use them to gain influence with certain people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, because of this car ring and because of this drugs and prostitution, he has a sort of alliance with the Straight Satans. Now, the Straight Satans, Bobby Bosley wants to impress them, so he goes to his mate, Gary Hinman, and buys $1,000 worth of mescaline, and he goes to the Straight Satans. He says, right, okay, fair enough. Here you go, here it is. They turn up the next day and claim that this is a bad batch and it's caused all sorts of problems. And they say to Bobby, you need to go and get our money back now. In fact, if you don't go and get our money back, we're going to kill you. So Danny DiCarlo tells him, you need to go and get the money off Gary Hinman. If he doesn't give you the money back, kill him, otherwise we're going to kill you. And he gives him a gun in which to do it. So Danny DiCarlo is the motivation behind this crime. Bobby goes. Now, Bobby doesn't intend to kill Gary Hinman because, how do we know this? Because he takes Susan Atkins and Mary Bruner with him, who are friends with Gary. He expects to turn up, explain the situation, get the money and leave. He turns up and Gary's getting ready to go on a trip abroad. I think he's going to Japan because he's into like Buddhism and stuff like that. And he says and Bobby says, you need to give me this money. And he says, well, I ain't got it. I can't give you the money. Give me the drugs back and I'll test them. Oh, I ain't got the drugs. So, well, you're putting me in a bit of a situation here, Bobby, because, you know, I haven't really got anything. Bobby panics and they get into a bit of a fight and he shoots off the gun. That sort of settles everybody down. Everyone's like, oh, God, this has got really stupid. We're all friends. This is daft. All of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. Now, unbeknownst to Bobby and Gary, in the panic, Mary has phoned Charles at the ranch. She's phoned Charlie and basically said...
Charles Manson.
And said, oh my God, it's all kicking off. Can you please come down here and help? He's run down with a chap called Bruce Davis, kicked out, or knocked on the door, and the second Gary Hinman's answered the door, he smacked him in the face with a sword and gone, there you go, that's how you be a man, that's how you sort the situation out. He then basically understands that they've already come to a conclusion. Gary hasn't got the money, but he's going to say, well, take my cars, take my 2 cars, sell them. There you go, problem solved. Everyone's got the money. So Manson goes off in the car. Now, at this point, Gary Hinman's a little annoyed that he's been smashed in the face with a knife, and he's cut his ear and he's got a big cut down his face that Bobby Bosley stitches up with dental floss. Right. And he's like, this isn't going to do. I need to go to the hospital. And you know what? I'm sick of this, actually. When I go to the hospital, I'm telling the police because Manson's, you know, slashed me in the face. Yeah. Bobby's getting into a real panic because if he starts talking about Manson, it's going to expose the mescaline, it's going to expose the Straight Satans. Bobby's going to cop for it from Danny DiCarlo. So he panics and he stabs Gary Hinman to death. Well, he actually phones up Manson and says, what should I do? And Manson basically says, do what you want. You're your own person. And the prosecution inferred that Manson had ordered him to kill Gary.
Well, let's just come on to that aspect, Neil, about Manson ordering the murders, right? Because if I said to you, Neil, I want you to go and kill whoever, right? Yeah. Right? And you do it, right? Am I then on trial for murder?
This is the contradiction that was one of the many contradictions of the case, was that basically the people who did the murders were not under their own cognizance. They were influenced by it. So they were innocent of that, but then they were actually found to be guilty of it. So the two...
So this is what they were trying to... I mean, to me, I could be wrong here, but legally this seems unprecedented to me, that you've got someone up for murder who wasn't even at the scene.
Yes.
Right. You think he might have gone back to the scene with them.
Yeah, I
right?
do.
And I think it's widely believed that he wasn't at either, well, certainly the first murder scene.
Well, Vincent Bogliosi made a point of that in court, saying that Manson was never at the scene, because if Manson was at the scene, it negates the entire cult aspect of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another point about the Bernard Crowe killing, is that basically, which came after the Gary Hinman thing. The other point about the trial...
Let me just stay on the legal point just for a second. So, surely it doesn't say in the law that just because you're commanding, let's use that word, commanding, through whatever means it is, whether it's hypnosis or whether it's manipulation or whatever.
It shouldn't alleviate the responsibility.
It shouldn't take the responsibility off that person and put it onto you.
Exactly.
For murder.
No.
Which is what they would seem to be trying to do in that. What they were trying to do in that case.
Absolutely.
And succeeded, yeah?
They absolutely succeeded. Now, there is an argument that basically the defence could have responded to this, and there was lots and lots of holes in the case. I mean, the very... Vincent Bogliosi basically came up with the theory of helter-skelter after talking to Paul Watkins and Danny DiCarlo, and he admitted that it sounds fantastic, but he needed a fantastic motive in order to sell this incredibly strange crime. Perhaps the defence could have actually countered this, except, and this is not a widely known fact, but in a trial that lasted over a year, the defence lasted for as long as it takes to say the defence rests.
Right, so there was no defence put?
There was absolutely no defence case put.
Right.
And what was very strange as well was that basically everybody that had any connection to the group, including the Mamas and the Papas and various other sort of Hollywood groups, they were all subpoenaed to be witnesses for the defence. Now, what does that mean? It means they can't talk to the press. It means that if you talk to the press, basically you are in contempt of court, and so you'll go to prison. So if you blanket everybody, it means that basically nobody can say, hang on, this isn't actually what happened.
So where does Bernard Crowe fit into this, Neil?
Right, well, Bernard Crowe was a drug dealer that lived, or sort of had his premises in Hollywood, right next to where Three Star Enterprises used to be, and he actually knew Tex. We knew all of them.
Tex is the guy who really did do the murders.
Yeah, Tex is the guy that is basically portrayed as being Manson's right-hand man, like his lieutenant. If you actually look at it, he was living at Dennis Wilson's house before Manson was there, because he was a drug dealer and very possibly a rent boy as well. But he left the ranch quite a lot. Manson didn't like him. He was back at the ranch for a very, very short period of time, at which point he hooked up with a girl called Linda Kasabian. But most of the time he was living in Hollywood with a girl called Rosina, who was his girlfriend, and a prostitute, and he was ripping off all the drug dealers. Tex was known to be a standover man, by which he basically would go and rob all the drug dealers of their wares, because what are you going to do, go to the police? No, of course you're not. Tex was not a nice guy. Tex was like well known to be violent and involved in all sorts of stuff like that. Basically, after sort of like annoying everyone on the ranch and being kicked off of the ranch, he goes back to Hollywood and starts living with his girlfriend Rosina. Rosina steals some money from him. She gets pregnant, or she claims that she's pregnant, and takes the money for the abortion and just basically rips Tex off. Tex is really annoyed, so he wants to make some money and get back at his girlfriend. So he phones up Bernard Crowe and says, I've got a brick of weed here for you. It costs you, I forget exactly how much, but basically a significant amount of money. I'll go and get it.
A brick of weed, that is a brick-sized piece of compressed marijuana, yeah?
Yeah. Right. He's got a serious amount of of marijuana or cannabis for him. Right. And Bernard Crowe pulls up outside the front of this house with Tex in the car. Tex says, it's in there, give me the money, goes in, walks straight out the back door, gets into a car with his mate TJ Wallerman, and they drive off. About 20 minutes later, Bernard Crowe realises he's been ripped off, and he knows that...
And he's dropping his own girlfriend in it.
Yeah, she's left there as the hostage, basically to prove that he won't do it. So Bernard Crowe phones up the ranch where he knows that Charles Tex Watson has been living. He says, I want to speak to Charles. They assume he means Charlie, Charles Manson, so Charlie answers the phone, and he says, I've got this girl here, I'm going to cut her head off, right? And then I'm going to come down to the ranch, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to rape all the women, I'm going to burn the house down unless you give me Tex or the money immediately. And Manson's like, turns to Tex and goes, have you just done this? He says, yeah. It's like, well, go and sort it out. He says, no, I'm not doing that. And he runs off. Can I just point out, what sort of cult leader is that? Okay, also by this time, Susan Atkins has been kicked off the ranch and she's going and living with Mama Cass, of the Mamas of the Poppers, because she keeps giving people incredibly virulent VD. Like, and people are getting annoyed with her. So this cult leader can't raise anybody. Danny DiCarlo won't go, nobody will go. So he basically takes this 22 buntline gun, which was basically then used in the Sharon Tate murders. This gun, by the way, was once owned by Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States. When he was an actor in the cowboy films, he used this gun. He gave it to a chap called Randy Starr. Randy Starr went and lived at the ranch, and he gave it to Charles Manson.
Yeah, there's a lot of names here. It is quite hard to keep up with, and there's hundreds of names in this book. And you need a great big chart.
It's a complicated story.
Yeah, it is a complicated story.
But basically, so he goes to Bernard Crow's house and says, look, what's going off here? Bernard Crow's not there, so he walks in and he starts untying Rosina and makes a cup of coffee. Bernard Crow comes back, they get into a tussle, and Manson whips out this gun and points it at him, and he fires it. Now, whether he intends to kill him or not, we don't know, but the gun doesn't go off. And then Manson goes, well, you know, that's just me showing you. It's an empty gun, it's a thing. Bernard Crow doesn't take too kindly to this, and so starts to strangle Manson, at which point the gun goes off and shoots him in the chest.
Right.
Bernard Crow falls to the ground. Manson goes and takes his jacket off of him, he takes it off his friend, and then they leave. Now, unbeknownst to them, the friend of Bernard Crow knows Greg Jacobson. Greg Jacobson is the producer that works with Dennis Wilson. And so he phones up Dennis Wilson and Nick Grillo and goes, have you heard what's happened? Charlie's just killed some black guy. And so they go, oh no, this is going to cause a problem. So they immediately put a hold on Bobby Beausoleil's album and Charles Manson's album. Okay, so that's where the concept of his rejection for the music industry comes from, that they put a stop on it. Whether this would have actually got released once he discovered that Bernard Crow wasn't dead is a completely other thing. But the idea that he was rejected by the music industry is nonsense, because at the same time he was being courted by Neil Young, who also wanted, and Frank Zappa, who were also trying to get him record companies with record contracts with various people. Anyway, so this goes back, and this has totally sort of ruined everything. So he's particularly annoyed with Tex at this point. Doesn't like Tex anyway. Tex has really gnaws this up for them all. At which point, Bobby Beausoleil is arrested for, along with Susan Atkins, for the murder of Gary Hinman. And at the time, it's a bit strange because Manson's off at the time with a girl called Stephanie Schramm. Stephanie Schramm, in all the books, is basically how he fell in love with her because she's of her Teutonic Germanness and her pure Aryan stock, which is to indicate that Charles Manson was a racist, which is why he got this helter-skelter thing going off. The only problem with that is that Stephanie Schramm's Jewish.
Right.
So that doesn't quite thing. A lot of people will be going, we know Manson's racist now, he's got a swastika on his forehead. That swastika was taken from a gentleman, an Indian, American Native American that he knew, called Walks on Top.
It started off as a cross though, didn't it?
He started off as a cross, yeah, and then he basically, once he got in with the Aryan Brotherhood in prison for protection, because he was known as a racist, he put it as a left-facing swastika. Then later, when it was burned off by somebody who tried to kill him, he had it tattooed back on, and it was put the other way around. Whether this was on purpose or a mistake, we don't know. But he has always maintained that it's not a swastika, it's a sun wheel that is there to protect him from white men. And he actually got this from Walks on Top, who was a Native American that he knew whilst he was in prison. Further to that, there's a suggestion, if you actually look at the Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, everybody except for Linda Kasabian rejects Helter Skelter as being not an actual real thing. And they actually say that Charlie wasn't really racist. He was perhaps a white separatist, which obviously is terrible, but he wasn't as racist as people make out, and he was a bit more nuanced. He actually knew black drug dealers that he interacted with, but he didn't like sexual mixing. Again, it's not a good thing, like, okay, but it's more nuanced than is presented. When he was in prison, one of his good friends was Geronimo Pratt. Geronimo Pratt, the Black Panther. In fact, on at least 2 occasions, Charles Manson saved the life of Geronimo Pratt. This is in Geronimo Pratt's own autobiography. So anyway, he's really, really annoyed with Tex, and he finds out that Bobby gets arrested, and he's going to need some money, a lawyer or something like that. He owes Bobby a favour because he messed up the Gary Hinman thing. Tex owes him a favour. So he basically goes to Tex, he says, you owe Bobby a favour. That's it, done. It's nothing to do with me anymore. I'm off to San Diego with this young Jewish girl, right? Tex decides that basically he's been knocking about with this girl called Linda Kasabian. Linda Kasabian's just been on the ranch for about a week or something like that. In the time that they have been together as a couple, they've been to visit Wojtek Frykowski. Wojtek Frykowski has basically imported a load of this new drug called MDA from 3 Canadian drug dealers, and one of them named Billy Doyle. Now, unbeknownst to him, this is a particularly bad batch. The bad batch is sold on to Linda Kasabian. According to various members of the Manson family, they basically have said this is what happened. And she's really annoyed with this. Wojtek's not too plussed either, and basically he takes Billy Doyle to a party at Mama Cass's house. Billy Doyle was also a boyfriend of Mama Cass, and ties him to a tree and rapes him in front of the celebrity crowd there that included Michelle Phillips and very possibly Dennis Hopper as well, and films the incident as punishment for supplying them with the bad drugs. These bad drugs end up at Linda Kasabian, and so this is the motivation for Linda and Tex to go and rob Wojtek. They know that Jane...
Wojtek was in the Tate household, was
yeah, he was living there.
So he was one of the people who was living at the house where the murders took place.
Yeah, he was Abigail Folger's boyfriend. He was a good friend of Roman's from back home, and basically he was trying to break into the movie industry. This didn't work, so he decided to try and break into the drugs industry because he saw that Jay Sebring had made such a fortune selling cocaine to people like Steve McQueen, Peter Sellers, Warren Beatty, you know, all the same people that we're talking about, Cary Grant.
So that was the motivation for going to that house?
Yeah, and Dean Martin. In fact, William Scanlon Murphy, who was a keyboard player for the Beach Boys, basically said that he knew that $20,000 worth of cocaine was going to be dropped off there for Sebring to sell that night. And Tex knew this, and so he turned up to try and rob this. Now, this is actually borne out by the fact that Cary Grant turned up to buy some LSD on the night. And we know this because his business manager admitted this. Cary Grant was in the garden of Cielo Drive with a rent boy, heard screams, thought better of it, ran off. Steve McQueen was supposed to turn up like to buy cocaine that night, but actually got sort of waylaid with a teenage girl at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and so decided not to go. So Tex, basically they decide to go and rob this thing. Now here's a really interesting point. Robert Evans, the producer, he was supposed to be looking after Sharon, and so he would go round to the house every day to make sure that she was safe. That one particular night, the only time he didn't turn up to the house, he decided to phone instead. And Sharon said, I'm not going to be staying here tonight. I'm going over to stay at my friend Sheila Wells's house. About quarter to 12, she changed her mind, and so she stayed there. Now, this is particularly strange for two reasons. One, if you know about the Cotton Club murders and Bill Menser claimed that Roy Radin was killed. He was a movie producer who had stolen a load of money and drugs from Robert Evans. Bill Menser claimed that Robert Evans had told him to do it. The other person that was involved in the Cotton Club murders was a woman called Lainey Jacobs, who was good friends of Dennis Wilson. So again, you see all these people sort of intertwined. Bill Menser was probably connected to the Son of Sam murders and connected to Mama Cass, basically.
So what do you say to people who say, no, the murder scene of the Tate murders, that was a ritualistic or satanic there was a scene because it was so, the way that they were strung up and the messages that were written, that was, there was a ritual there? No,
I don't contend that at all. I think that comes from how that started was basically because there was a headline in the Los Angeles press that said ritual-type slaying at Hollywood home, and there was a suggestion that they had hoods put over their heads, which wasn't true. It was a towel that was laid over Sebring's face. But yeah, no, I don't believe that. In the actual original police report, it shows that he doesn't look like it was a robbery. Obviously, people make a big deal about they called up and they slit a telephone line and then they went in through a window that they cut. That was never in the original police report. In fact, there were 2 open windows right next to this supposedly cut screen. The original police report has them walking in the front door. Right. Now, what's strange, in the official story, the first person to die was a chap called Stephen Parent. They turned up at this house at random, saw this lad driving down the drive, and says, right, okay, stop, bang. And he was stabbed and shot by Tex, apparently. Right. This isn't borne out by the evidence. The evidence shows that actually this kid's reversed down the drive at such speed that he's nearly gone over a ravine, and he's destroyed a fence as he's done it, as if he's trying to get away from the house. What happens, and we also know that the phone line wasn't cut before the murders happened, because there was a call placed just after 12 from Cielo Drive to Witold K, who was a friend of Roman Polanski's. So what actually happened is essentially Tex has turned up and he's basically said to Jay Sebring, we want all these drugs, we want all this money, whatever you've got. And his plan was to take Jay to his home on Eastern Drive. Eastern Drive is where he lived, at which point Sharon's panicked and tried to make a run for it. Tex, who's high as a kite on meth, which is also forbidden by Manson, which again goes to show what...
So just, Manson forbade certain types of
hard drugs, yeah,
within his group?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, which obviously they paid no attention at all to.
Right.
Yeah, she makes a run for it, and Tex stabs at her, and we know this because basically the timeline, the police have someone shouting at about 1:15, oh God, no, please don't, and a woman screaming. There's then a large pool of blood on the front porch, which suggests that basically Sharon's tried to run for it, he's stabbed her, and then he's punched or stabbed Jay, and they've both lain over the bushes at the front of the house. At which point, Stephen Parent, who's been watching this, has decided to drive away. Somebody runs up to him and slashes him with a knife. Now, if you look at the people that were there and the weapons that they actually had, it transpires it probably wasn't the Tex that slashed him, it was probably Linda Kasabian, because she had a knife and was outside. Linda Kasabian then became the state's witness, became completely immune from prosecution.
So did she get to go to prison at all?
No, not at all.
Right.
She was up for 7 counts. She was on death row, and then when Susan Atkins changed her mind and said that this story is all bull, they offered that immunity to Linda Kasabian instead. Right. So basically what's happened is, this has all happened at sort of about 1:15. We know this because that's when Stephen Parent's watch stopped after he was stabbed. This goes completely against the official story, which has it half an hour earlier. About 10 minutes later, they're outside this place called the Weber's house, where they got picked up. They were washing their hands, apparently, on the hose. Now, one of the things that they don't talk about the Weber's house is the Weber's house backs onto Jay Sebring's house. So what's happened is they've gone there to rob Jay Sebring. It's gone wrong. They've stabbed whatever. They've taken whatever they can, and then they've gone over to try and get into Jay Sebring's house. They've got caught by their neighbours, and so they've driven home. Okay, at which point they've got back, and Manson's back with Stephanie Schramm. And they talk about it, and they suddenly realise they've left 2 people alive and a whole plethora of clues over there. So they get back in the car, at which point Linda drives them over, with Tex hiding in the back of the seat of the car. And they then shoot Wojtek Wachowski and Abigail Folger and stab them to death. And we know this to be true because, again, the police report has gunshots and screams at about 3, 4 in the morning, which, again, completely destroys the official story. It also shows, though, that Manson was at least present for 2 of the murders. So, you know, he's not innocent by any stretch of the imagination. He's not a nice guy. Yeah. That's what's essentially happened.
Right. All right. Well, let's come on to just quickly. Do you think there was those tapes that were found in the loft? Did they have any paedophilia or bestiality in them?
Right, okay. Wish was about 14. Ruth Ann Morehouse was about 14. These are girls that are involved in the group. Right. Okay, so there was underage sex going on. Right, okay. There was a lot of... These were teenage girls, right, okay. And this is another point, okay. Dennis Wilson was having orgies.
Let me interject again. But that tape never surfaced at the trial or was never discussed.
Oh, no, well, no.
So there was things being hidden from the trial to protect celebrities.
Well, these other cases... Well, again, yeah, absolutely there was. I mean, that's the point.
So do you think the mafia basically basically closed ranks, appointed the lawyers, paid for the lawyers, because there was a whole load of people's reputations on the line.
Yeah.
If the absolute truth had come out with this.
Yeah.
And the whole Manson is a guru, mind control leader.
Yeah. It's because they had to create a motive that was as far away from the real motive, which is essentially just a grubby drugs murder that exposed all these seamy Hollywood things, and they had to appropriate him as a cult leader. So
now, where's the name?
Krishna Venter.
And you think that they used Krishna Venter as kind of a
template,
a cutout, a template. So just briefly tell us.
Krishna Venter was a real cult leader that lived in Box Canyon, which is just down the road from Chatsworth, which is where the Spahn Ranch was, prior to...
About 20 years earlier.
Yeah, about 20 years earlier. Now, he believed that he was Jesus. He also believed that he was the devil. He also believed that basically all the women in his harem should sleep with him, and that he was that was the whole point. They were supposed to venerate him like that. He would hang off a cross and do crucifixion rituals. He would encourage them to have orgies and encourage them to use hallucinogenic drugs. He strongly believed that a race war was on the cards, where the black people would fight against the white people. He felt it would be the Russians, but same principle. At which point Krishna Venter's posse would disappear into the desert behind Box Canyon and hide in the mountains until such time that their group swelled to the number of 144,000, at which point they would come back. It's pretty familiar.
So they've taken a lot of the detail from his story and apportioned it to Manson.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the prosecution witness, Paul Watkins, who was nowhere near the ranch or anything, he'd been sent away to live with a Scientologist called Paul Crockett at the time. But all of a sudden, because all this publicity was happening, he sort of ingratiated himself with Vincent Bogliosi to get some sort of power. Danny DiCarlo had already been telling them that Manson was a Nazi, and then Paul Watkins told him about Krishna Venter and the Beatles. And so from this, Vincent Bogliosi was able to cobble together this concept of a cult leader and give a motive that is crazy, but not too crazy if you think of all the race wars and race riots that have been going off and stuff like that, that basically just sidestepped all the actual salacious gossip.
So what about people who say that they think Manson was a victim of MK Ultra, which is a CIA-run mind control program?
I don't think that he was, and the reason I say that is because he was in Vacaville, which we know that they did mind control experiments, but he wasn't in Vacaville until after the trial. It's entirely... I wouldn't say that it was impossible, but I haven't seen any evidence of it. I haven't seen any evidence of the institutions that he was in doing that types of experimentation, and I've not seen anything that would suggest that he would. I would suggest that two things happened. One, he's a pimp. And so essentially there is a degree of mind control with that. If you look at the girls and the way that basically they talk about him and they really venerate him, then go and watch American Pimp or Hookers at the Point or Pimps Up, Hose Down or any of these documentaries and look at the way that the girls react to their pimps. And it's remarkably similar. If we think of Manson as a drug-dealing pimp, it all of a sudden makes, oh, well, that's where he's getting the money from. Oh, well, that's why he's able to ingratiate himself with these celebrity circles. Oh, that's why they're so loyal to him, etc., etc., etc. And that certainly explains why basically all these people went against him all the time and acted in ways that weren't as if he was a cult leader, certainly if they didn't think that he was Jesus. But the aspect of MK Ultra that I do believe happened is to do with the Weather Underground, in as much as during the trial, Manson wasn't really that sort of nobody really cared that much until the Weather Underground, which was this left-wing break-off of the SDS run by Bernardine Van Doren, started praising Manson as a revolutionary hero and saying that basically 1969 is the year of the fork and that these rich pigs deserve to die and stuff like that. And I think that basically there's a lot of suggestion that the Weather Underground is basically either infiltrated or formed by the CIA as a way to demonise other leftist groups like the SDS, like the Black Panthers, etc., etc., else, and tar everybody on that particular side of the fence with this violent brush. And I think what they did was they got lemons and they made lemonade. They saw this grubby drugs murder felt that Vincent Bogliosi had spun this nice cult leader thing, and then what the government did, the aspect of MK Ultra that I believe took place, was that they used this to demonise the concept of communal living, the concept of anti-war movement. And
so clearly your book illustrates quite well that the trial was staged, managed, let's put it that way.
Oh, totally.
And the narrative was largely made up by the prosecution lawyer. But those behind that and motivating that was possibly mafia connections to protect
very
celebrities. Do you think there was any government interference with the actual trial, or you think that they just used it?
I think they just used it afterwards. Like, there is a suggestion that the FBI was involved, but if you look at the quotes from it, I don't think the FBI had a motive to do it. I think it was the mafia that had a motive to not get their name put out there. And there's certain quotes from Manson as well. Manson says at one point, Vincent Bogliosi came to me from Geneva with his plot of Helter Skelter, and he promises to give me sunshine if I'll just go along with it. Right, okay, again, that sounds nonsensical. And so you sort of break it down. It's like, Helter Skelter is obviously the concept that you're a hippie cult leader. We're going to play you this, okay? You just go along with it and everything will be cool and you'll get some sort of benefit in prison. Manson's an institutionalized guy, so he's quite happy in prison anyway, if we're brutally honest. The concept of coming from Geneva, I think that's what, because he uses these slangs, I think what he's saying is someone from the Genovese mafia has actually approached Vincent Bogliosi. There's numerous quotes where he points out that his Italian stock and various other people connected to the case, like Calabrero and Caruso and stuff like that. There's a running theme of mafia, and I don't think any of these people were in the mafia, so it's just that they sort of overarch it. They're the organised syndicate behind everything, and they don't want their drugs, prostitution, and connections to Hollywood to be exposed. I mean, there's huge amounts of evidence as well that that Hollywood studios used to launder money for.
It's kind of similar to a case that I investigated, the Didcot murders.
Yeah,
in one sort of respect, in that there was no trial in that case. Okay, it's just an inquest, but I'm convinced that the police and possibly intelligence agencies in the inquest ran the case to frame an innocent man because, well, I won't go into the full details, but there's certain information they don't want to come out, so they have to run the trial with a particular story, and all the participants have to, I mean, with that case, but at the core of it, or involved strongly in it, is drugs.
Yeah, or organised crime. So
they
know what the real answer is, but that's going to cause too much problems. Yeah. So they basically overlay. Yeah. If you look at the Manson case, basically, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest the police didn't want to solve the case. They lost evidence. It was reporters that found the bloody clothes. It was a 12-year-old lad that found the murder weapon, and then the LAPD actually lost all of this evidence, only to then re-find it when the parent of that, Stephen Weiss, threatened to go to the newspapers. Yeah. I think they really didn't want to uncover it. I think they wanted to just let's just keep it out of the way.
Another case that comes to mind is the Barrymore case, because there was drugs involved in that, and Barrymore was friendly, I believe, with certain of the police, and they would turn a blind eye.
Well,
but
Jimmy Savile was Friday Morning Club, or whatever it was called, where the police would turn up and they'd smoke cannabis together.
Right, yeah. So there's a number of cases where a death or deaths have occurred, and it's not run as a proper murder investigation and all the truth brought out because the police are somewhere compromised already or involved with organised crime. Yeah. And it doesn't, so the trial never sees the truth.
Yeah. I mean, just to give an indication of the type of person that Vincent Bogliosi is, right, okay, after he'd made millions and millions and millions, like prosecuting Manson and selling his own book called Helter Skelter, which laid out his case, he tried to go for, DA or the head of the DA at the time, and he was exposed that basically he led a campaign of harassment against this poor guy who was a milkman, and he's insane. He'd become convinced that this milkman was the father of his son.
Yeah, yeah.
And so initially,
that is a side thing in the book. Yeah.
And so basically, he tried to smear this guy and basically ruin his life. Right. And this was found out. Later, he got his secretary pregnant. Okay, and then beat the living crap out of her when she refused to get an abortion.
So this is the prosecution lawyer in the Manson case you're talking about?
Yeah, that's Vincent Bogliosi.
Right. So what's Manson's situation now then, Neil? He's still
prison.
alive, isn't he?
Yeah,
Right. So is he going to get out, or what's?
No, he was never going to get out. Like in fact, Bruce Davis was given parole last year. He was one of his followers, so to speak, and it was immediately overturned by the governor of California because there's no interest in letting any of them out at all. Like at all. Linda Kasabian, who was the main witness for the thing, she's been in and out of trouble with the police ever since. Tanya, her daughter, who she ran away from the ranch because of the murders and left there and didn't bother to get until months later, went to various communes, didn't tell anybody about the murders, didn't tell anybody that she'd abandoned her daughter. She grew up to be a drug dealer called Lady Dangerous, who has tattoos on her face.
It's just, you just think, well, you know, where's the person in all this who's coming out and is going to bring some truth or justice to a situation like that and many other trials?
Oh yeah, well yeah. I mean, but in this particular case, that will never happen. Like they're just sat waiting for Charles Manson to die in prison, essentially. Because now, even whilst he's in prison, he's constantly caught with massive amounts of weed, massive amounts of LSD, cell phones, that type of thing. Yeah. I think he's quite happy in prison. I think he's perfectly all right there. You know, ticking along. Again, just to reiterate, he's not a good guy by any stretch of imagination. This isn't a sort of like free Charles Manson thing by any stretch of imagination.
Not at all. But my concern is just the whole way that the legal profession can be compromised so comprehensively if your thesis is true, and what can be done about that. Oh no, that you didn't come here to answer that question probably, but. Because I've experienced, if you want to watch the film about the Didcot murders, because that's something that I'm much closer to in terms of having done that investigation, and I know I've spoken to Tony Bennett, the solicitor, about police corruption. Oh, because that ultimately, let's say in that case, if the police had not been corrupted, right, you might not have had that, although it's the legal profession as well as the police, isn't it?
Yeah.
They have to be corrupt in order for a trial to essentially spin a fantasy.
Yeah, there has to be people who are willing to turn a blind eye, isn't there? Like basically, and yeah, I mean that's certainly evident.
Right. Okay then, Neil. Well, thanks so much for your time. We are going to do another interview on fake news and other subjects. But is there anything else you want to add just before we wrap up with the Charles Manson story?
Just that I find that the actual story is far more interesting. There seems to be the mainstream story. There's the story that there's the theory that is connected to sort of satanic cults, like the Protestant Church, and I discuss that in the book. We haven't got time now. And then there's the real story that actually happened, and it's seedy and it's salacious and it's complicated and it involves a huge amount of people and a very, very complicated cover-up. But I actually think that that's more interesting than the mainstream story.
So can I just ask you, when you thought, oh, this is something I want to go into detail with and do a real investigation, albeit from another country, you changed your mind on it as you were researching it. Yeah. So you believed in the mind control aspect.
Yeah, I thought that was certainly plausible, and I thought it was connected to a cult called the Protestant Church of Final Judgment, which is again one of the main theories. Protestant Church of Final Judgment. They're an offshoot of Scientology that were labelled suppressive peoples by L. Ron Hubbard, and there are certain things within their ideology that they believe that Satan and Jesus you can inhabit both parts in the same person, so you can be Jesus and Satan, which is something that Manson said. They believed in orgies, and they have a certain element of Scientology language, like coming to now and stuff like that. And Bill Mensa was certainly connected to the Protestant Church of Final Judgment. He was the person that was involved in the Roy Raiding case. And so there's a running theme. He certainly met with the process on a number of occasions, Brother Eli and various other people like that. And he actually probably met Robert de Grimston as well, who was the leader of this cult. And I strongly believed that was heavily involved in it. When you actually come to look at where this actually started, The reason that the Protestant Church was actually brought into it was because just after Manson was arrested and this was starting to come out, tabloids all over the place were going, oh, this is interesting, this is fascinating. And they tracked down Bruce Davis, who was Manson's follower, and he was working at the Scientology temple in London, which was the main Scientology temple at that time. And so they approached the Church of Scientology. So this Manson family guy, he's a Scientologist, and this was incredibly bad PR for Scientology. So what they did was they killed two birds with one stone. They released a whole series of press releases through the English media that was then picked up by Vincent Bogliosi and the Los Angeles media, and says, oh no, it's not. He's not in Scientology. He's in this thing called the Church of the Protestant Church of Final Judgment. And by the way, they're Satanists. Right. So basically, they killed two birds with one stone. They shifted the suspicion away from them, and then they also managed to you know, smear their rivals. The other book that talks about the Protestant Church of Final Judgment is The Family by Ed Sanders, no relation. And that was, again, what I thought to be one of the finest books on the subject. It's still very, very good. But he apparently has all this insider knowledge of this cult aspect of Manson. So I was curious to find out where he found this. There's an interview with Ed Sanders online that you can watch. And in that, he candidly admits that he had no knowledge of this cult, that he got the knowledge of the cult from Vincent Bogliosi and the prosecution. So what happened was the Church of Scientology, in a panic, issues this statement to try and remove them from the story and to smear their rivals. They paint the concept that their rivals are a satanic cult. Vincent Bogliosi can't present this in court because basically it'll get stomped on. Protestant Church will turn up and sue him, and this will be exposed as a lie. So what does he do? He releases it on the sly to Ed Sanders, who publishes it in a book, and that way it is presented as a conspiracy theory that you weren't supposed to know. Right. But the point of that is to give you the concept that, well, of course Manson's connected to this satanic cult because we know he's a cult leader, and so it's circular logic. If he's connected to the cult, he's more likely to be a cult leader, and this is a conspiracy that we've unearthed. Lo and behold, it's not a conspiracy that we've unearthed. It was a bit of PR that was put out by the prosecution to bolster their case.
Right, okay. You're careful that Scientology doesn't come after you, Neil, because they do go after people who will speak against them.
He's nothing to do. Yeah, I'm sure they do. They'll squirrel the hell out of you. But basically, he's nothing to do with Scientology. He just has taken a certain parts of their ideology.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that Scientology can be protective over their church.
Yes.
And will, if people get things wrong about what their ideology is, they've been known to sue people, am I right?
Stop giving them ideas, Richard. Let's say Laney Aramia, who he learned his auditing off, becoming theta clear apparently, was not officially connected to the Church of Scientology. Bruce Davis was officially connected to the Church of Scientology, and he was kicked out for using drugs. Right. So it's nothing to do with the Church of Scientology. They're just another part. They're as influential on Manson as Christianity.
Right. All right then, Neil, thanks very much again. And remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.